Hey Shane, I got a Zoom question. Do you have a minute?
Yes, I do.
Do you know if something happened to the polling options? This is for something I'm trying to set up another meeting.
Yeah, so the polling options you can access in your personal Zoom settings, and it's like a toggle now.
Yeah, that's where I am. And I'm looking where I did it before, and there's no option. I looked up the help and like it's not
I had to
visible.
click I had to click advanced options, and then it took me to a web page where I was like presented with a ton more options to be able to turn them on and off.
Under settings?
Yeah, like in your actual Zoom, like so in the actual Zoom interface, like like the
Yeah, I logged in. I went to my browser and logged in at zoom.us.
So yeah, if you click settings, and then on the bottom it says view more settings, and it takes you to a Zoom web page where you sign in and all your options are listed in there.
Huh. Yeah, that's what I've done. Maybe we haven't changed our options. Like that's how I've done it before, like signed into my account in the browser, not like the Zoom app.
Right.
And then created the poll and it's all, but like the options aren't even there. You know how it says like you haven't created a poll for this meeting and there's a little link to add a poll? It's not even there. And I mean, yeah.
I'm looking at here, I'll just share my screen real quick.
Okay.
I'm looking at it it's in meeting basic. So like right here.
Yep.
And then it's in polling. So maybe they did take it off for you.
Yeah, they must have, because I have co-host and right after it, it's always show meeting control bar.
So strange. I don't understand why people toggle that stuff on and off.
Yeah, but that's helpful to know. All right, thank you for the tech support. I'm going to email and wine tower guy about it. I don't even know who to contact. Morning, Dana. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Excellent.
Excellent.
I had a great chat with my folks last night, and I introduced my mom to Gritty.
Nice.
And she was thrilled. The Philly Flyers mascot, a hockey mascot. He's like this. Okay. Yeah, the orange guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great election memes.
Where are your parents?
In Eastern Connecticut, and I've been dithering and just decided I'm not going to travel for Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
So that was hard. But I don't want to kill them. So,
right.
You know?
Get it.
Yeah. So we decided we're going to Zoom bother each other as a family. We're going to like check in at noon as if it was lunch, and then like 2, 3 in the afternoon, like, you're sitting around having coffee, kind of check in. Nice. Morning, John.
Hey, John.
Hi, John.
Shane, are you guys going to have the first sign up prize again for John?
I don't know. I haven't. I don't know if John was the first this time. Were you slacking?
You're on mute, John.
On the computer.
Yeah, I didn't think I was going to be able to do this, so I didn't sign up until a little later. This is my last meeting anyway. I'm retiring next May. I'm going to hang up my spurs, so to speak.
Well,
put on your motorcycle boots.
I sold the motorcycle.
Oh, that's right. That's right. You got a green race car kind of thing?
A canary yellow Corvette.
Aha.
There we go. Are you sure it's not an actual robot?
Oh, yellow Corvette. You got to watch out. Bumblebee.
You can still join farm to plate meetings if you're just feeling the itch,
Well, we'll have to see how that goes.
Or I can just call you at random times during the day.
You can do that too.
Dana, how was it being on Shelburne Farm? Were you ever in the office?
I have not been back. I have not been back to my office since the first week of March.
My partner was working in the farmyard last summer.
Yeah.
So we went and took a walk during the summer, and it was a trip to see it. So It just felt like a ghost town of sorts.
Yes and no. Like the amount of people walking and using the farm for just exercise and recreation it's always been high, but that has skyrocketed this summer. Yeah. The parking lot up by the Welcome Center has been, I don't think I've ever seen it so busy.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been really buszy, which is great.
Locals?
It's a great, a lot of locals, a lot of people just coming and wanting to get away. You know, there's about, I'm going to say there's 8 to 10 miles of trails. Is that right?
Mhm.
I think that's right. If you actually do all the whole network of all the trails on the farm, there's loads of trails, and there's so much variety in that 8 to 10 miles. You know, walking to the lake is a big destination, but yeah, the obviously the programming is, you know, pretty well shut down.
Yeah.
Everything's moved to what can move to virtual has moved.
Dana, on Saturday, we shared 2 bottles of champagne with the Ottomans on our back deck. Properly socially distanced, I will add.
I've had a chance to visit him a couple times. I miss him terribly. You know, we usually spend Thanksgiving and Christmas together, and you know, at least once a month together. And so I've taken the kids up there twice, and we've just hung out in the yard with them a little bit. You know, half an hour or so. But yeah, I'm glad you got a chance to spend time with them.
Yep. Well, we did have something to celebrate on Saturday, as we all know, so.
Yes.
I was out getting gas and heard everyone honking. Was like, what's going on? I got home and got on the computer. Was like, ah. But now I heard somebody describe it, and I think it's really accurate, that it's like you're watching a horror movie and the monster has just been slain, but then you realize there's 20 minutes to go in the movie.
Yeah. That is how I felt as the monster was being killed. I was like, oh shit, there's just still so much.
It wasn't
There's
killed. It
so
just
much.
like fell off the boat and like disappeared under the water, but there's still bubbles. Lots of
Right.
bubbles.
It was one
It's
head
like
of the
Darth-
Hydra.
It's like Darth Vader in the fighter going off, spinning off into the distance.
Right.
I
Who
saw
knows
a
if
great
he's
Star
coming
Wars. I saw a great Star Wars meme that was oh, I have to get the names right. So the first Star Wars was, what's the very first one called? It's
Return. I should
oh,
know
I'm
this.
gonna mess this up.
A
We
New
need
Hope.
Ellen and
A New
Jake.
Hope.
So Barack Obama was the New Hope.
Yeah.
Then Return of the Empire, or yeah,
Empire Strikes Back.
thank you. Sorry, I had these in my head a minute ago. Empire Strikes Back was Trump,
Yep.
and then A New Hope.
Return of the Jedi.
Return of the Jedi, being Biden. So I was like, oh, I love that. Yeah, that's a good, accurate representation.
Yeah.
If I got it right. Sorry, I totally messed up.
Morning, Whitney.
Hey, Whitney.
Oh, how you doing?
Good. We haven't gotten to meet. This is one of my favorite parts of Farm to Plate is like we all have our tag of where we are and sit at the table and chat. I'm with 4-H. I do tractor stuff.
Oh, nice. I'm at the Center for Ag and Food Systems at Vermont Law School.
Cool.
Yeah. Hi,
Morning,
everyone.
Betsy.
Hey, Betsy. So Betsy and Dana, you should be co-hosts right now, so that should give you access to just about everything.
And Betsy, if you just said hi, you're not muted, but I can't hear you. There's something funny going on with your sound.
Oh, no.
I discovered a secret button that I didn't know about on my headset where if I press it or bump it, it actually mutes me. So I can mic and I press it again. Maybe it's something like that.
My favorite is when people have their Bluetooth headphones connected and they are just talking, but they don't realize that they don't have their headphones on.
I know. All right. How does
There we
this
go.
sound?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, Shane, we'll just, jump back and forth with a few things and we'll all back each other up with technology and we'll make it all work, right?
Yeah. And then I have like a little script to read before we kick it off, and then I'll just pass it to you two.
Mhm.
And just in case your presentation doesn't work, I have it up too.
Perfect. All right, so great to see all of you.
We need waiting music.
Or the trivia that was from the beginning panel. Didn't get a chance to read all the trivia questions.
Let's see if this works or not. Does that work?
A little bit. It's like when you're on hold, but you're also calling from some mountainous town in Vermont, so your cell phone service is going in and out.
At the risk of breaking protocol and talking out of line, good to see you, John and Liz, or at least your tractor, Liz. It's been a while.
Morning, John. Yeah, that tractor hasn't been getting its work out. That was the 3D printed back end from students up at UVM, but it turned out to be too delicate to really take on the road. So it's more of a little showpiece.
Wait, did you say they 3D printed it?
Yeah. Yep.
That's wild.
And it was cool because they had never done any farm stuff. They're interested in machines and 3D printing and heard about it. It was actually, I think it might have been, no, it wasn't through Farm to Plate. They heard about it. But they ended up going out to the Hort farm and visiting a bunch of real tractors and taking measurements and really understanding how the tractor worked to put all the parts together. And then made the, little pins and clips out of paper clips and bits of wire. And yeah, it was a pretty neat project.
Jonathan, are you still teaching at Linden?
Oh, very definitely. While it's still there, yeah. I've just, very sucked into the union fight to save the college system. So that's been sucking all my life lately.
I've been involved in that very much up to my eyeballs. Elaine Collins is on my board of directors. So we're kept pretty much abreast of what's going on.
Yeah, we have a proposal going forward, and at probably at some juncture I might even share it with, with this group just looking for support. But we'll see. We're working on the legislature now. So
Yep.
But yeah, teaching still.
I think you're probably from the same tribe as my wife. Her maiden name was Chalstrom.
Very cool. I'm pretty sure my family's name was Vikstrom and then when they came to the United States, they went to Strom.
My father-in-law was born in the US in California, but he didn't speak English until he went to kindergarten at the age of 6, because the community they were in was all Swedish.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so welcome everybody. We give folks another few minutes to jump on and we'll dive in. I'm looking forward to the discussion this morning. Seeing a lot of familiar faces from our conversation yesterday afternoon. And while we're waiting, one of the first things we're going to do is use a Jamboard. So I don't know if people are familiar with that. I'm going to put a link in the chat, and I'll do that again in a little bit. You could pop in, and we're going to begin. Well, Shane's going to lead us off, but after that, we have a little exercise to just be thinking this morning about, what are the bright spots of what is working with ag literacy in Vermont. And if you're in, I see a bunch of you in the Jamboard now, and I can share my screen once we get going, but there's on the left column a way to add sticky notes. If you click on sticky note, you can fill that in. At the very top are some arrows. So there's 2 pages. If it gets filled up, we can jump to a second page. But think about that if you want to get, play around with it for a little bit, and we'll get started in maybe, Shane, just a minute.
Sounds like a plan. Just let me know when you're ready, Betsy and Dana.
Okay. Well, I think we should get started. And a few more folks might jump in, but let's get going.
Cool. So, hello, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us on day 2 of this virtual Farm to Plate gathering. It's nice to see everybody's faces, and per usual, we're sad to not be in person, as I think has been the common theme since March. So you are currently in the next decade of ag and food literacy and education session. My name is Shane Rogers. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Farm to Plate Communications Manager at the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. Before we get started, I'm just going to run through a couple of the expectations for the session. So we're asking that folks please make sure their Zoom name reflects your first and last name, your preferred pronouns, and your place of work if applicable. We are asking that you remain muted unless called upon or engaging in a breakout room conversation. If you would like to speak or you have a question, you can use the raise hand feature to let us know, or you can drop something into the chat as well. For some basic guidance for how to run through this, we would like people to refrain from interrupting others. We hope that you're coming to this conversation from a place of respect and kindness. And we do want to note that these sessions are being recorded and they will be shared on our website following the gathering. After this, well, this is the last session of the gathering, so we're going to ask that you return to the main session, and I will drop a link in the chat to get you all there after that is done. But other than that, I just am here to introduce our facilitators, Betsy Rosenbluth, Vermont Feed and Shelburne Farms, and Dana Hudson of Shelburne Farms. So I will turn it over to them.
All right. Thank you, Shane. And hi, everyone. I am going to put, again, the link to Jamboard in the chat. And before we dive in with a presentation of the ag literacy briefs and a conversation about the agenda for the morning, we just thought we would take a couple of minutes to jump into that Jamboard. And I'm going to share my screen so you can, if you can't get in there and can't use Google Apps, it might be tricky. But we wanted you to just think about a bright spot. What is working in ag literacy in Vermont? What are some of the things we don't want to lose or we want to build on? And drop those in with a sticky note in this link, in this Jamboard. So
Betsy, if someone has a challenge with using the app and has a bright spot, if they put it in the chat, I will happily type it into the Jamboard form.
sounds good. All right, so this is what it looks like a little bit. And if you can see my cursor on the left, you can click sticky note and that'll bring it up. You just type it in and it pretty seamlessly will add to the screen. All right, everybody have a chance to move some things in. All right, well, we'll give folks a few more minutes, but maybe just take a minute to look at what we have up here, which is a lot to build on. The strong support for organics and communicating the value of local food and consumer awareness of ag literacy, interest in soil health. There are also CTE programs, job shadowing, hands-on education, field trips, certificates, etc. Farm to school activity in schools, farmers markets, very common, talking directly with consumers. The connection with local providers and local economies. And creativity with meal distribution throughout the pandemic, virtual farm field trips, and gleaning with students. Yeah, robust sales at farmers markets over the summer. And you all in this room, you can feel free to ask a question in the chat, or if something is unclear or if there are any surprises, feel free to take yourself off mute or just add that to chat. And any last ones I'm gonna. All right. Thank you. Farm to Family and Double Up Bucks programs. And a renewed focus on food that's on people's plates with the pandemic disruptions. A little bit of the context for this conversation, even though we're talking about the next 10 years. All right. Strong CSA participation. I'm going to flip over now to some slides while I'm screen sharing. Feel free to add in here. At the very top of Jamboard, you see some arrows, right? And that takes you to the next frame. So we have a bike rack. And that's where if there are things that come up today that you feel like we're not addressing or you want to make sure Farm to Plate circles back to, feel free to use that. And I'll explain some of the other pages as we get into the small group discussion, but just so that you know, that's the navigation's up at the top of that page, okay? And here we go. Let's see if this works. All right, so I'm Betsy Rosenbluth. I'm the project director of Vermont Feed, which is a farm to school partnership of Shelburne Farms and NOFA Vermont. And Dana Hudson and I are going to facilitate the conversation today. And I think, Shane, you pretty much covered some of the guidelines already. But more specifically, these are the guidelines as part of all of the Farm to Plate conversations and conferences. To speak from your perspective, not others, from a place of curiosity and learning, paying attention to the impact we have on others with what we say and how we say it, and not interrupting. This is, I think, important in the small groups. And we're gonna look at, I think, parts of at least 6 different briefs. And so Dana did an extraordinary job of trying to distill things down to look at what bottlenecks, opportunities, and recommendations we have in these briefs. We're gonna then break into small groups for a deeper conversation to identify priorities and be able to share those out. And so as we begin this session, we thought it was important to at least look at how do we define ag literacy? And so we pulled just a few different definitions. We're not going to spend the morning picking one or aligning around one, but I think it's important as we think about ag literacy over the next decade, are we all on the same page with what that means? So here we pulled a few. All people in Vermont will have access to the knowledge, skills, and resources to select, grow, hunt, fish, forage, process, store, and prepare local food, and will feel welcome as part of the local food movement. Oh wait, this is the Farm to Plate goal. I'm sorry. We're going to get to the ag literacy definitions. I was thinking that is a really good definition. Okay, these are some of the draft goals. So the goals for the next plan aren't completed, but this is the draft that has been developed so far. And the second relevant goal is that Vermont farms and food system businesses can access sufficient, diverse, and reliable employees. Okay, so as we talk about priorities, we're thinking which priorities, which recommendations are really going to move the needle on these goals. All right. And I think we talked a little bit more detail yesterday about the plan development process, but you can see where we are in that process, that teams have been drafting briefs on over 50 topics. And there have been a series of focus groups. And today we're gathering input on the recommendations and priorities in those briefs. The Farm to Plate leadership team and staff and Agency of Ag will be pulling all of this information into a new strategic plan that will be released in February. All right, and here we go with some of the ag literacy definitions. An agriculturally literate person would understand the food and fiber system, and this would include its history and its current economic, social, and environmental significance to all Americans. Another one, agricultural literacy revolves around the ability to think critically and make value judgments about the impact of agriculture as an economic and environmental activity and the concurrent societal and political pressures that result from those judgments. An agriculturally literate person understands and can communicate the source and value of agriculture as it affects our quality of life. And the last one, a little bit longer, if a person were literate about agriculture, food, fiber, and natural resource systems, he or she would be able to engage in social conversation, evaluate the validity of media, identify local, national, and international issues, and pose and evaluate arguments based on scientific evidence. Because agriculture is a unique culture, an understanding of beliefs and values inherent in agriculture should also be included in a definition of agricultural literacy so people can become engaged in the system. So I just want to pause if there's any comments or thoughts about this.
I have a comment. It seems kind of abstract. I think ag literacy or fluency might also involve skills to do agriculture as well as understand about how it works.
Mhm. Thanks, Liz. Any other thoughts, comments, things that resonate or don't?
Yeah, I have a comment. This is Molly Anderson at Middlebury, and sorry I'm masked up, but I'm in a public space. I think number one, we need to be really clear about which of these definitions or our own definition that we're adhering to if we're promoting agricultural literacy. And second, one of the things that I think is really important in ag literacy is the ability to imagine our future food system and to go beyond where we are now to figure out alternatives that are better. So there's an element of knowing what's out there, what other people are doing, and also being able to imagine a pathway for us to get there.
Thank you, Molly.
Betsy, this is Suzanne. I also had a reaction. I think it's interesting that the definitions don't differentiate between sort of like big ag versus smaller or local agricultural systems. And it's just an observation.
Mhm. Thanks. All right.
I have a similar observation. Values are so subjective. I'm not sure how you assign values to a diverse culture, and I'm not sure any of these definitions really reach those who are illiterate. and that should be our goal, not to agree on a philosophical definition of literacy, but how do we reach those who are basically illiterate?
Mhm. Okay. Great. Thank you. All right. So
I just had one more thing, sorry.
absolutely, John.
Following on from what Jonathan just said, I think part of the issue also has to be educating people as to why they want to be literate. You know, why should they care about this stuff? You know, if you don't do that part first, then the second part isn't going to follow on very well.
Mhm. Yeah. Good point. Okay. Dana, let me turn things over to you and I can run the slides and let's jump right into what we have with the briefs.
Excellent. Thank you, Betsy. And hi, everybody. Great to be here with you all today. And I actually think all these wonderful comments you just had about ag literacy and the definition that we don't necessarily right now have a shared definition, that could be a really important next step, but it really highlights the diversity of this conversation, all the different aspects that we have to take in consideration. And I think that became evident when we were working on the briefs and trying to figure out how to divvy this topic out into multiple, making sure it represents multiple briefs, but that multiple briefs have some element of ag literacy in it. And how do we successfully demonstrate that when we bring together this group and looking at so many briefs. Now, I know that there are other breakout sessions that might be trying to look at 2 or 3 briefs at the same time, but this one is pretty comprehensive. We've got 6 briefs that we felt were in some way had agriculture and food literacy components in them. And so we did our best to highlight that. So the next few slides will dig into what we saw in those different briefs. But I just want to take a moment to make sure everyone sees the 6 briefs that we're drawing from and who was the lead authors on them, as well as just know that there's obviously a support of other authors on each one of these. It was a team effort. And I think we do have a few, hopefully, folks either on this call that either were part of one or maybe even multiple of these. You may not be the lead author, but if questions come up about that content in the brief or what the intention was and some of the barriers or opportunities or recommendations, I hope folks will feel comfortable to jump in if you worked on any of these briefs, so that we can get the best understanding as to what the ideas were in each one of them. So you can see there was an ag and food literacy that really sort of focused on more of an adult audience. That was Chuck and Allison. There was an ag literacy looking from kindergarten to 12th grade, really trying to understand what's happening in the school systems and outside of school for our youth. The workforce and education one, which Sarah was the lead on, was very much had a lot of components, which you'll see around training and how do we, really educate the next generation within the ag and food workforce. The school food procurement one did step away from a little bit from the K-12 one, because it really is, multiple layers within the school systems, within the institutional systems, but there was components that tied in well. So there's pieces of that in here. Ag tourism, and I don't know if Lisa has been able to join us. I know she was going to try to. And then the consumer demand one, again, and I don't know if Jean's on this call, but these all had components that we felt needed to be merged together to really think through the lens of ag literacy. I think next slide. All right, so this is a little dense, so I apologize, but this is actually 32 bullets or 32 points from 6 briefs that we were able to whittle down, consolidate into these. I think there's like maybe 10 or so, 11 bottlenecks and barriers. And I'm sorry, I'm going to sort of read them out to everybody. I don't know how big everyone's screen is. I am going to just go through each bottleneck. And if there's confusion about it, I don't know if folks want to drop that in the chat, or if someone worked on a brief that they felt like they need to highlight a little bit more, we could do that. But I really want to make sure that this time is spent on the recommendation slide. So I'll tease with the bottlenecks and gaps and the opportunity slides. Okay, so it came up in multiple places that the Agency of Education really does lack some capacity. So there's, there's interest in wanting to be, but they don't actually have the staff capacity to be part of a lot of the ag and food literacy work that we're all doing. And so that became a definite barrier within a couple of the briefs. The fact that education and agriculture and tourism all sort of work within different languages. And so that's sometimes can be tricky to know that we may be speaking about the same thing, but sometimes it's called marketing and sometimes it's called, educational programming, and that they are very similar in some respects, but that they all just sort of work slightly in different circles. That in this third bullet combined a lot of ideas that, that a lot of consumers are challenged by not valuing food costs, the production of their food, the impacts agriculture make. and have an expectation of food that is low cost and is available year round, even if it's something that's not seasonal or not local. And that we understand a little bit about eating habits being set at young ages, but that we still really lack some of the data as to how to shift eating habits. So that's really sort of focused on consumers' expectations and knowledge. There was a number of bottlenecks that were focused on farmers not having access to information or resources or skills around everything from good customer service to all the, interesting marketing strategies now, looking at social, digital marketing sort of stuff. And that for folks that are opening up their farms to their community and to tourists and to students, there's confusion and lack of understanding around zoning and regulations and permitting that they may need to know. And that also then links to the concerns of opening up their farms with the safety and liability of having visitors. Another barrier that came up was that the tourism industry struggles a little bit on how to share a lot around agritourism and education farms, because it may not be as organized as they need it to share it widely. So that came up in one of the briefs. This was an interesting thing. In the workforce and development, they spent some time talking about, where there's a lack or a little, the opportunities haven't been met yet. So it's a little bit of a gap on how to combine seasonal work in our state. And so to link people from one seasonal job to another seasonal job to make a sort of full-time year-round work. A couple of briefs highlighted the career technical education students and the fact that, and we can dig a lot deeper into this one if it doesn't make a lot of sense, but that the students, the money follows a student as they leave their one high school to go to the career technical center, and that they're instead of just providing the opportunity, sometimes there are schools that maybe don't spend as much time encouraging students to go to CTE, that may be a good direction for them because they're the concern of losing some of those dollars. So sort of somehow the barrier of the money following the student does impact students' abilities to access programming. There was reference to agriculture education that is maybe outdated, unorganized, a little scattered, and that one that, again, food and farm related jobs, food service, food systems work is often not highly respected and often underpaid. So before we go, can I just take a moment to see that there's some chats and I apologize, a lot of me talking to you, but I wanted to, I don't know, Betsy, have you been looking at what people have been saying in the chat box and can share any additions, or do other people want to turn their mic on for just a moment to?
I'm going to have to rely on you and Shane because I can't see the chat box when I'm sharing screen.
So Emily has said, I appreciate the part about ag literacy, helping individuals evaluate. Oh, I'm sorry, that's from the definitions. Here's Emily. Emily said that the third bullet point really resonates with me. As a food system educator at the co-op, I spent a lot of time trying to help communicate the true cost of food and externalize cost of cheap food for people on the planet. And I'm always looking for new strategies to help communicate these ideas. Excellent. Thank you, Emily. And Jonathan has said that the CT issue is not new, has not really changed in 16 years that he's been involved in education. Yeah, thank you. And the next slide, we're going to talk about opportunities. And I talked a little bit about history. And I probably could have spent some time in this barriers one talking about what these are old issues that we still haven't solved. Because that's absolutely true, both in where there's opportunities and where there's barriers. Before we go, any other?
Yeah, this is Suzanne. Sorry, it's a pain for me to type and think and read, so I'm just going to speak. I also wonder, I know that the third bullet, there's a lot there. I also wonder if the third and the last bullet are somewhat related. I think that people also don't understand what goes into, I think because people don't respect farm and farming, they might not respect the costs and understand the value of the food. So I bet you there's some connections there also.
Great, thank you, Sam. Good points. I'll give another minute to see anyone else wants to unmute and share something. I do have one more comment in the chat box I'll share. John Mandeville had said, as I have said several times before, in a farm to plate environment, we have a paradox. We want healthy food to be affordable to all, but we also want producers and their employers to make living wages. Yeah. And that becomes evident throughout this whole part. So thank you, John. Anyone else before we move on to opportunities?
Just real quick, thinking about the outdated or unorganized ag ed resources, I think that also applies to the way that some ready-made curricula are structured. So like if you want to teach a course in a high school about food systems and do a Google search, not just the content, but also like some of the ways to involve students could be updated.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, move to opportunities. If other people have comments, maybe drop it in the chat box. So in the opportunities, again, I'm going to try to keep this part brief because I want to spend us as much time as possible on the recommendations. And there was, let me see, 33 opportunities over the 6 briefs that we found. So tried really hard to consolidate. So upfront apology if anyone feels like something was dropped or is missing in these. And this is still draft, so we can bring those ideas back in. But there in the opportunities, I really saw 3 overarching themes emerging. And the fact that there was a readiness in Vermont for us to continue this work, to expand this work. There is, so much work already been done, both as individuals here on this call, other people who aren't, as collective networks at the Farm to Plate group. There's just been a lot of work done. So there's a readiness. And it came up also the fact that, and I think actually it was in this morning's opening message, that the pandemic has really refocused our energy towards food security, which is, it's an unfortunate opportunity, but it is an opportunity that we need to recognize and be able to move forward with. That, and I'll let you read the bullets, but that the another big theme was that Vermont has a really strong history of we've had ag related education, sustainability related standards in our education. Oh, someone want to talk?
Just to let you know.
Oh, sorry, Molly. I think you're okay. Great. The standards have been worked on, 20 or so years, lots of collective effort to change the standards. Now, of course, we're using different standards, and some of those, that language has been brushed aside, but it still exists. And but there's history there. There's so many past organizations and existing organizations that have worked to connect farms and communities. And I highlighted a couple of existing and past ones. You'll see, Vermont Farms Association, the Vermont Farm to School Network, the Rooted in Vermont, the Ag in the Classroom Partners. We have Open Farm Week. We have Ag Literacy Week. So, we have a strong history and presence. And the last is that we have a lot of tools, programs, relationships, and networks that exist. And trainings that are underway. So this is just sort of the opportunities. I'm not going to spend a lot on this one because I really want to spend time on the recommendations, but let's spend 2 more minutes of anything in the chat box, anything that you want to say out loud around opportunities. I see Liz says and 4-H. Absolutely, Liz. I couldn't highlight all the programs, so I just sort of dropped a couple in.
Could I add one thing? I have a class that's just about to start, but it seems important to me that students understand where they can plug into the food system and making a change, whether it's through internships or other opportunities. And that is connected with the point I was trying to make earlier about understanding what the future of our food system will be and what the pathway is for getting to that future.
Thank you, Molly. Those are excellent points. And I see you had made some of those in the chat box. And I'm sorry, I'm not the best Zoom person. Is all the chat comments also saved in this recording? Does anyone know that? Give me the thumbs up if they know that that all these wonderful points.
If the host set it up that way beforehand, yeah.
I'll save them all.
Great, thank you. Because I think there's so many valuable ones unfolding here that I want to make sure we catch the language. And I see a couple others. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to move to recommendations to make sure we spend a little bit on this here, because this is where I'm hoping everyone in their small groups can dig in. And actually, if you want to bring back some of these opportunities and barriers that weren't highlighted, that'd be a great place in your small group to make sure that's accentuated in your notes. So we took 29 recommendations, and I tried to consolidate and find the ones that seemed most relevant. And again, this is my effort. This was trying really hard to work with on all 6. And these are 11 that sort of, sugared off here to the top, boiled up to be the most pressing, or the most, well, and some of them are consolidated. So let's this is where I want to spend a little time. So the first one, and these are not ordered in any priority way. I just wanted to put numbers by them. So as you have your small group discussion, you could say, let's spend time talking about 5, or wow, 11 seems really important. So, so the first one that I put on here was that a strong recommendation to increase the agency of education's leadership capacity and participation within these conversations. Because that then, brings up not just our youth, but also all our adult programming as well that can be out there. So this seemed like a priority in a couple of them. Another one that came up in at least 2 was the redesigning the funding model of the career technical education students and how the money flows. So that was, and again, if any authors are in the room or anyone that has the history that wants to elaborate, we can do that after we get through the 11. It came out in many of them to expand training, apprenticeship, stackable certification programs, and that's a really consolidated language, basically for the slideshow. There was lots of details around that. And I do want to say, if I can just take a moment to say, each one of these probably almost has, a page worth of content that really goes into explaining these in detail. And if your group wants all that content in your small group session, there actually are slides at the very end here of all the language from each recommendation. So I didn't want to lose that, and I wanted to honor that, but this was an attempt to be readable as a large group and move forward with it. So the fourth one you'll see was around supporting the collaboration and coordination between all the different cross sectors. This was both between government agencies as well as with the nonprofit partners. So that came out in many of the briefs. And one of the main action steps that came out was trying to convene these partners to really address these ag literacy gaps. And I would almost say coming up with a shared definition might be one of the first steps within that number 4. Number 5, prioritize research and baseline measurements of ag literacy behavior change. And there's a lot of really good specifics around that recommendation. Expand more programming. And that's a really almost a watered down version, my attempt to sort of water down many different ideas of how to expand existing programs that exist. That came up multiple places. There was a lot around marketing campaigns and making it more statewide and collaborative. There was at least 2 briefs that mentioned funding the state farm to school program fully. The 9th one there is around, there were a lot of points around addressing labor and training and transportation and human resources and employee benefits, and that these can be pulled together within the workforce and trade organizations, that we could sort of pool some resources to address this. Number 10, the agritourism, and this actually comes back to, it was recognizing a lot of the work the Vermont Farms Association did, but that we're at a place now that we need to develop some more best practice standards around promoting the Vermont brand. And then the 11th one, last but not least, and this is definitely a big one that talks a lot about the liability insurance for farms opening up for education and tourism. And it directly links back to one of the barriers around zoning and regulations and supporting the relationship with municipalities to improve the overall tone and environment of ag tourism in our state. So that was a lot, and I'm sorry that I know it's a lot of me just talking. But I wanted to open it up to questions, clarifications. Anyone who was part of one of the briefs that wants to elaborate a little bit. And Betsy, before we do the questions, could you just give me a time check? How are we doing?
You're fine. We're
Okay.
in, yeah, we have time for clarifying questions and
Maybe a little conversation. It feels like it's a manageable size group that we can actually have a little conversation about it.
Yep.
Okay, so let's stop there a moment and see, is there anyone that has, oh my goodness, I've done a bad job. I have 23 hands raised. I ignored that section. Oh boy. I need some support here on this.
Just Jonathan has his hand raised.
Oh,
So
it's just
Jonathan, yep.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. 23. I'm not the most savvy Zoom user, so thank you all. Jonathan.
Yeah, I'm not speaking for 23 people as said in the guidelines. So I think the one that just the whole redesign the funding model for CTEs. I'm not sure how much we can do that because I think a lot of that is chickens scrambling for the same federal dollars. You know, I think there's a lot of this is federal money that gets dispersed in the educational system. And so I'm not sure how much at a state level we can do, but you know, certainly if we can do that, we can. But I think it's a culture of there's a culture of directors versus principals trying to get the same money, and I'm not sure how much we can do on the state level with that. Just a thought.
Can I address that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was the vice chair of the Regional Advisory Board for Green Mountain Tech for 6 years and was on that board for a total of 8. And it's not really a federal issue, it's a state issue. It's the state, if the legislature wanted to change that, they could do it overnight. It's a legislative function. And there has been resistance to it for years. But it comes out in the legislature in some way, somehow, almost every year. There's more and more pressure being brought to bear, and more needs to be brought to bear to get that changed.
Thank you, John, for that. I'm sorry, Jonathan, did you have something?
I was just going to say, good to know. Thanks. So it is something we could work on. So.
Other feedback. I see that Joe brought up the question, does education about the charitable food system fit into this discussion somewhere? It's a great question that maybe in your small group you can start to pick away at. Other thoughts? We have a little time, so if there's any responses, and you won't hurt my feelings if you have strong ideas or concerns, or is any one person that has worked on a couple of these briefs want to elaborate?
I'll say something. I know I'm note taking, but I always bristle a little bit when I see recommendations after recommendation to create statewide collaborative marketing campaigns. As someone who leads Rooted in Vermont, that's what Rooted in Vermont was and is intended to be. And the difficulty in getting folks to join on board, even though they will say they want to be in group meetings like the Farm to Plate, is just, I don't want to say it's insurmountable, but it's huge. People abandoning their own message to talk collectively is a huge, huge hurdle. And I think it's just something to note because people will say they want to do it, but when push comes to shove, I haven't seen it.
Well noted. And I'm now questioning my own consolidation here, and wonder if create was the right word. It was, again, multiple points around marketing and how we should do marketing. And so I'm wondering if create is actually, I can look back at the detailed recommendations. And in a little bit, when you guys break in, if you want to see the details, there's 4 slides at the end. And maybe Jake, you can help me figure out how to share those. I'm sorry, Shane, show me how to share those with everybody in their small groups.
I can address a little bit the issue of apprenticeships and stackable certification programs. I was part of the statewide group that put together the initial curriculum for the Skilled Meat Cutters Apprenticeship Program. And obviously been involved in other ways. Apprenticeships are, in my opinion, are the best way to go for any of these sort of training programs because they are apprenticeship programs. They actually pay someone while they're learning, unlike some other means of getting education across to people. The issue becomes who does it, and in my opinion, the only apprenticeship programs that are really robust are those that are federally certified. In order to be federally certified, they have to meet particular criteria, but where you house it, who does it? Right now, just about the only apprenticeship program of consequence being done in the state are being done through VTC. And that's good, but there are not many of them. And it's difficult for many people to participate in them because they're not located all over the state. You either have to go to Randolph, some of them you may be able to do in Rattleboro, some of them you may be able to do in Williston. But if you live in the Northeast Kingdom up in Essex County, none of those places are exactly convenient to get to. So, again, it comes down to who does it, where are they?
I have just an observation too. I think I'm struggling a little bit with it. Feels like there's so many different threads in this big topic. Like we're talking about education to children, to general adult consumers. We're talking about education for people who want to go into this as a career, I think. Agritourism. I mean, this feels like there's a lot of different populations and topics and directions all in this under this one big umbrella. So I'm struggling a little bit with that. So that's one just comment and observation. The other thing is I just hope under number 4 that when we're doing some collaboration and coordination that we can also include Vermont Department of Health among those state agencies as a representative from the Vermont Department of Health, for those of you that don't know me. But just sort of thinking about, I mean, maybe the actual one-pagers or whatever separate out all of these different like education to consumers, to kids, to professionals, but it just feels like a lot right here to get my head around.
Thank you, Suzanne. You're right. It is huge. And I think it's a good question of where is the right place for overlap and where is a place that, working within the silo of a certain topic is more appropriate. And I think that's as these trying to figure out how to tackle this, I kept imagining a Venn diagram of all these different things and where is that point of overlap with all of these. And that's where that ag literacy piece comes in. And maybe some of these aren't in that overlap part within the diagram. So I think that's something to maybe note, especially either in the back to the Jamboard bike rack, if there's something that you feel needs to come out, or in your small group discussion. You may say this is important, I'll pick on one. Number 9 is important, but let's not put in ag literacy. Let's just keep that one. And I'm not really trying to pick on 9, but as an example, it is, and as the person that was trying to consolidate them, it was definitely sometimes forced, sometimes obvious. I want to keep an open, here's someone actually, I'm looking at the chat boxes. Joe has said, I suggest that 4 and 6 could be combined into one breakout, depending on interest. Oh, thanks, Shane, for saying about consolidating. So actually, the breakout groups, we had planned on not actually having people pick 1 or 2 to break out on specifics, but actually look at these as a whole and say what feels like the highest priorities. And I know Betsy's going to go a little bit into the strategy of how to do breakouts and that we have something to do before that. But right before we get to this next section, I just wanted one more moment. I think we're okay, maybe 2 more minutes. Is there any other comments? Is there any other clarifying questions before we actually start doing what you guys are already ahead of the game and starting to do? No hands raised. All right, so then I think we'll just, we'll go to the next thing, and and if more clarifying questions come up, we can definitely go back to it. Betsy, am I passing it back to you at this point?
Sure, I can give some just instructions. So if we go back to the list of recommendations, and I think the point is well taken, we are trying in the limitations of a morning session to look at ag literacy. So it doesn't mean that for workforce development or agritourism, there aren't some really substantial priorities, but in the context of ag literacy and our goals, if we look across this array of briefs and these recommendations on the screen, do some of the levers start to emerge, and what I mean by levers, are there recommendations that you see having a ripple effect, maybe the larger impact, again, on the topic of agricultural literacy? And let's identify those. We've been asked to identify some of the priorities, and I think prioritizing based on the goals and some of the slides early in this presentation, what brings us to what Molly was saying, the future food system that we want. And so we would begin now just for a couple of minutes individually to reflect on that. It could be there's a recommendation missing and you want to bring that up and prioritize that. But what of these recommendations would have the biggest impact towards our goal? What would you say are the biggest priorities? And so just a couple of minutes, I wish I had good music to play, to reflect personally. And then what we want to do is at Breakout, we're going to break out into groups of 8. I think that's probably 3 groups. And as a group, go around and share individually where you're at, and then dive into that discussion. We have a couple other questions I'll put in the chat box. Actually, I'm going to stop sharing so I can do that for a minute. Okay. Hang on a second. There we go. Okay. So take a minute here and think about that, spend your time. And then the second question I have is, do people want a bio break before you move into your small groups, or do you want to take that break within your group? We have about 40 minutes as a group to share your priorities, to talk about anything missing, to think about, given those priorities, what actions over the short term, say the next 1 to 3 years, would build some momentum? And what do we need to make those actions happen, whether it's resources or connections or things like that? So there's 4 questions that I'm going to put in the chat box here. Copy that. There we go.
And Betsy, that one topic that came up already in the chat box, Liz had asked about sharing the entire slideshow to the group. Is that something that, Shane, do you have capacity to do that so that people can, as in their small group, flip back and forth between the different slides if they want to?
Yeah.
As long as we're okay sharing that link, then we can just drop it in the chat.
Yep. I just dropped the, it's in Google Slides. So I just dropped the link here in chat.
Thank you.
So you can pop in there, you can look at the recommendations, you can look at the questions, and if you scroll to the end of the slideshow, it's the full recommendation for every brief completely written out, so you can see more of the detail and where that, if that's helpful to
You
you.
might want to adjust the permission settings and getting a, I'm going to have to request access. You're going to get 25 request accesses.
Okay, I'm going to do that right now. Thank you, Liz.
And while you're doing that, I'll just say that at the end of the slideshow, the full detailed recommendations, there's actually 4 slides of them. So slides, I think it's 18 through 21 is, so don't just get stuck on the first 1 or 2. There's 4 slides covering 30 some recommendations.
So we're giving you a couple minutes. Think about those priorities.
Betsy, before we break out to the the breakout sessions, I had one more thing I wanted to share, but I want to wait till people finish their personal reflections.
Mhm. And I think on the bottom of your Zoom screen is a little icon that says reactions. And when you feel ready for the next step, just put a little thumbs up in your screen, and we'll get a sense if we're ready to move on. Okay, we'll just give folks another minute. All right, so you'll have a little more time. You can create that time in the breakout room if you need a few more minutes. We're going to ask Shane to split the group into 3 groups of about 8. If you guys want to take a break within that time, talk to your group. It would be wonderful if someone in the group wants to capture some of the highlights of the discussion, key takeaways, and email those to Shane. But minimally, what we're asking is for each of the groups to at least strive to identify 3 top priorities, levers, and to add those back to the Jamboard. So there's a page in the Jamboard for each of the groups. Here, I'm going to put this back in chat. So each of the groups to just use sticky notes and put those down. And it's just going to be an easy way for us to see what the other groups have said. And then we'll come back together, take a look at that, and talk between the groups before we go back to the full discussion with Farm to Plate. So the questions again that are in the chat is identifying anything missing, identifying the levers that have the biggest impact towards our goals, you know, what are priorities, and, you know, at least identify 3 if you can. Do the best you can if that makes sense and put those down. And begin the discussion about actions over the short term, the next year or 2, that will start to build momentum towards those recommendations. And then anything, what do we need to make those happen? What connections or resources are important for that? And I think if we can come back together at 11:30, so we will send you randomly into breakout rooms. We'll give you a warning, maybe a 5-minute warning, bring you back together at 11:30. And then we'll share out as a group before we move on. Dana, did you have another thing you wanted to share?
Very briefly, and I think you may have just covered it, but I just want to encourage people that if you have great dialogue or a really important point that you can't figure out where to put, please use the bike rack on the Jamboard. Just because you might say, oh, I really wish so-and-so was part of this conversation. We'll put it up there on the bike rack, or boy, this piece is really missing. I just want to make sure we don't lose any really valuable thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Quick question. Are there facilitators in these groups, or are we on our own to facilitate ourselves?
You are on your own.
Okay.
Dana will be in one group, and I'll try to move between the other groups if there's questions. And then Shane, do you want to stay in the main room? And people could pop in and ask questions, or if somebody's having a glitch at all, you can bring yourself back into the main room.
There is also a help button if you have the new Zoom downloaded at the bottom of your screen when you get into the breakout. So you could just press that and request me to jump in just in case something happens.
Or Shane, if you want to join a group, then maybe that works.
Yeah, either way, it should still work anyway.
Okay. Okay, that would be good. And I think when we come back together as well, we're going to think about who else needs to be at the table for some of these priorities to happen. You know, what roles should the Farm to Plate network be playing? So there's a few more questions, I think, for our last half hour. Okay, any other questions, comments, things you need for these discussions? All right, so Shane, you're going to send us away. You just have to accept your breakout room, and we'll all reappear in a smaller group. So Shane, you and I should separate out into different groups.
Looks like Shane's in here too. I'm happy to try to take some notes and try to revisit. I'm just looking at what those 4 questions were so that maybe we could go through them sort of sequentially, if that makes sense to people. Where were those questions? Okay, so maybe we start with, is anything missing?
I think I struggle. Hi, I'm Katrina. I'm with the Center for an Ag Economy. I struggle with that question of what is missing, partly because the recommendations are so broad, and I feel like I've got, from where I sit, a pretty narrow view of some of the factors or some of the things that I can identify as important and why. But it's hard for me to see beyond my view, and even harder to see beyond this expanded view that includes such a broad scope of things. So I'm struggling with that.
Skimming it now, and I apologize, I might have missed this because I'm not the best at processing information on Zoom sometimes, but some kind of incorporation of like a diverse network in terms of including people of color and indigenous groups. I feel like that's really important in each aspect of the recommendations, but even maybe its own separate recommendation in just ensuring that all of these recommendations are accessible for people of color and just diverse populations in general.
Yeah, I haven't made it through all of the ones on like slide 18 to 21, but one of my thoughts was similar with like the migrant worker population. I didn't know how that came into play, but it did look like they made mention of it outside of those 12.
It strikes me, it seems like the articulated goals are primarily about like employment and access, and like there's the addition of participating in the food movement. Wasn't super clear to me how significant that was for the goals. But as a educator, it seemed like the recommendations were more in line with preparing a workforce and like marketing goods, as opposed to like systemic understandings that seem to show up in a lot of the ag literacy definitions. And I think that maybe connects with recommendations about accessibility of this education for everybody.
Yeah, I agree. It feels like there's like kind of 2 siloed groups of like first round of education, like how do we call the most folks into being literate in these topics, and then also like a further development and what are the best recommendations that we have to give people the training that they need to be like have a career in this field. So it seems like 2 audiences almost.
Maybe 2 fields too. Like I mean, obviously working in ag is participating in the food system, but then food system studies is also sort of a separate, separate is not the right way to put this, but those are different but related paths maybe.
It feels like there's a lot of things here that I'm not quite sure how to identify what's missing while I'm still processing all that is encompassed in this list. maybe it would be good for us to identify the like priorities or the biggest levers, and then things might come up from there.
Yeah, let's see how our time goes, but maybe we walk through the other questions and come back to the what's missing question at the end again.
Yeah, I think when we get like deeper into another topic, it might be more clear what's missing from that action step.
Yeah. So the next question is about levers. What are the levers that have the biggest impact towards our goals? What should the priorities be? Did everybody who wants to get into the farm to play ag literacy, like, do you have the 1 through 11 to reference right now? Okay.
I'm finding myself really drawn to I lost the number, number 8, fully funding a state farm to school program. And that's based on what I've seen in our district, and CAE has a staff person who does farm to school education with the district, but it also does a lot more than that. And I'm not directly involved in that work, but what I hear from her is just how, I think how overwhelmed the schools are in a lot of ways. And that sometimes when she comes in to do like a farm to school lesson, it might, what the kids really want to do is just like cook food together or shared food together or do these other kind of community building activities that there may not be enough capacity to do in other parts of the school day. And so I guess I've seen and I've heard how powerful that is in our own district. And I feel really lucky to also like live in that district and have elementary age children in the schools where this is happening. And I'm just imagining how powerful that could be if it were more widely available across the state.
I see.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely.
Go ahead, Emma.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I see, let's see, the fully funded state, I see a lot of parallels, I think, between number 8 and number 6, because I think strong farm to school programs, even if they're based at schools, they are community, they engage the whole community, including families and, you know, adults of all ages too. So I'm thinking, so I'm in agreement with you, Katrina, that I love the idea of 8 with the idea that 5 or number 6 really follows right behind that.
Yeah, I was just going to say I agreed too. I think education is really a really big leverage point. I work with new nonprofit organizations trying to integrate climate change and regenerative ag and social justice principles into like a program that students can earn credit through. And it's just been really interesting trying to incorporate that through like flexible pathways and the existing education system. So just sort of, yeah, I think also along with the collaboration between like agency of education and nonprofits and all of the partners.
I would think too, I mean, what I've seen just within the farm to school network is that, you know, there's not a huge participation from the agency of education within that farm to school network, but the agency of ag and, you know, the agency of health seems much more present. And so I kind of always ask myself, why is that? You know, what's the deal? And it would be really interesting, I think, and a good level to, I mean, increase their participation in the network overall. But then it's that idea too of like their participation in something like that is then going to increase their knowledge and also then trickle down to kind of showing the importance of farm to school to all the teachers that they're also working with. So it's kind of like that importance of saying, you know, as an agency, we really believe in this. We're really strong toward this. We support this. We have staff working on this. And as educators in your little hometown schools, you should too, you know, kind of thing. So as right now, that's not reflected statewide, or so it feels. So, I mean, maybe also just that level of getting the agency of education really highly involved, because I mean, they're highly involved in the school meals and Rose is amazing and, participates really well, great, and they're awesome at participating in the network, but that's just the school meal folks, not curricular folks or things like that. So I think that would be an important way to get folks, to move the dial and represent a little bit wider across the state.
So I appreciate that. I think Dana changed the language on point number 7 to strengthen rather than create statewide collaborative marketing campaigns. And to that point, I really think a lot of that lies in identifying who we're talking to and getting out of our lanes as good food organizations or good food people, and really trying to speak to audiences that aren't our bread and butter. I think very often we get into this feedback loop where we are searching for engagement or whatever looks good on a grant report, and we're not necessarily taking the risk to talk to folks who are not engaging in agriculture, local food, any of these systems that we're purporting to want to expand to the rest of the state and the country.
I'm hearing an echo from the breakout room I was in yesterday around market development in the afternoon. And there was just a really strong emphasis on the need to, similarly break out of our lanes and just think about market development and collaboration between agritourism, recreation, tourism, skiing, all sorts of things that contribute. And so I'm hearing similarities today with what you're saying too, Shane.
I think it's important to, like how we talked about all these groups kind of being siloed with their own language and speaking to everyone in our own language of ag literacy, like creating common verbiage so that those collaborations are more accessible, and like agreeing on what we're calling what, so that when we communicate out to everybody, it's across the board, people are hearing the same thing and it's not so confusing to a new somebody who's learning this information for the first time.
And to elaborate just really briefly, I do think a lot of these other recommendations they're all interconnected, right? So like by strengthening farm to school participation throughout the state, we could then directly link that type of language that the kids are experiencing and learning to the adults that are in the household, welcoming those kids back and having conversations about X, Y, and Z that they experienced in school. I don't know if we've necessarily drawn those connections and made an explicit effort to try to bring that all together into a cohesive package that we're putting out.
Is that a potential segue into the next 2 questions, which are around, like, given the priorities that we identified, what actions over the next 1 to 3 years would build momentum? Kind of feels like you're kind of framing that a little bit, Shane.
Unintentionally.
Yeah.
There's one thing that's just kind of gnawing at me a little bit is that I don't think is addressed here, maybe, is the idea of, the career technical education is, the stigma of it still is for, it's still out there that lower achieving students go to career and technical centers. And what are we doing to break apart that stigma? And I don't see that here, because we're going to be continuing to butt up to the same thing if these professions are not elevated. And so I don't know where to stick that and where to put that, but like, really, how do we make career and tech education just how education is done here in Vermont? It's not a separate building everyone goes to go learn how to do woodworking or whatever. You know, like it really needs to, how are we, so every student sees this and is able to see this as a career opportunity, not just a certain type of student.
I think one of these, forgive me, I forget the number, mentions transferable skills. And I think that's, my sense is that that's something that the AOE is putting resources behind in I guess a significant way. And I think that there's, to me, I think that's the nexus for how to break down the barriers that we've kind of constructed in schools between handwork and headwork. And it seems like, you know, transferable skills around problem solving can really significantly connect agricultural labor to like systems and justice and liberation and pedagogy. And I think that would be a place to put that focus if that's a goal.
Yeah, it's
There's so
definitely
much science and technology in all of this. You know what I mean? Like that's like, as you know, like I just see somebody as like, I'm more of a biology nerd. Like I look at this as ag literacy as like an amazing way to be teaching science. And so, and career tech paths, you know, as well as we go higher in education. So I get frustrated at thinking that those paths are not going to be exposed to many students because they may not go down that road education wise.
My suspicion is I don't know, but my suspicion is there's a funding barrier currently. Like I know, like the dream is to have a cool working greenhouse that the biology students are, et cetera, but like getting those things running or having teachers or schools trained in how to write the grants to get the support to get those things running. I don't know.
Well, it's also come down to teacher education. If teachers aren't taught how to teach in this hands-on, place-based manner, then they're just going to go back to the textbook and the screen.
Yeah, just anecdotally, I know I mentioned this already, but Regeneration Corps, which is this project I'm part of, we just launched this fall at Thetford Academy, and we had students come to Cedar Circle Farm, and I just thought it was like that's like exactly what we're trying to do, is integrate all of those different aspects, and I think our goal is to expand eventually, but just sort of using that model going forward.
I'm going to take the teacher education piece and put it in a what's missing category, because I think that has been identified. I mean, we know that there is so much professional development in the state for teachers, but greater access would be really awesome. I'll put, I don't know, the chat box is so hard to read out of. You all have shared so much, and I want to try to give some of it back so you can see so we can kind of see a summary. I just hovered sort of on the black and white, on the line between my video faces and the chat box, and you can make the chat box quite a bit bigger. So if anyone wants to try that while I paste a bunch of this stuff in, I think we could.
Vera, are you able to share your screen?
Oh yes, let's do that instead of a garbled. Yeah, unfortunately, I was taking notes in my email. So if you can just hang on for 1 second, I'll just create a document and then I'll just share it with you all. Actually, I love this because I also, I I don't even drink coffee, but I feel like I'm just so slow this morning. So if you all can look at where I'm not capturing your words, and if you want to edit these notes, that would be great. Let's see.
I guess while we're waiting for you to do that, I haven't said too much because I'm on the same level as everyone else. But I keep going back to the whole funding aspect of all of this. I feel like people have a lot of trouble with the funding, and funding is difficult to get or to find, put together, just because there's either not funding exactly for what wants to be done, or there's too many organizations providing funding and it gets overwhelming. And also, like, on the grant respect, like, not everyone is trained. Like, teachers who want to gain funding aren't always trained in what programs they want to gain funding for. So that goes back on the whole teacher education thing, of literacy, but as well as for grant writing. I think that's just it can either be a little hurdle or like a big obstacle for some people. And there's a lot of programs that are trying to do the same things as well. So it's trying to find also interconnectivity between those programs that are trying to do the same things. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, where having something funded more securely through the state would eliminate the need to have to spend time on those grants. It can be such a huge distraction, not only applying for and finding the money, but then once you've gotten it and you've done your work and maybe the work changes somewhat over time, then you have to report on it. And there are just so many ways that takes up space.
And to affirm kind of what Rima said in the beginning, and Keegan, you touched on this as well, but that would, I guess, also free up that space to be able to actually question the systems that we're trying to educate on, whether that's in the marketing or with students as well, to be more inclusive, and to resonate with everybody rather than the dominant culture.
Thanks for taking such great notes, Vera.
You're welcome. Definitely needs your edits. Shane, I am wondering, does anybody remember how many more minutes we have in this breakout?
18.
Oh, wow. Okay. We've got a little time. So it's interesting to think about moving on to the second question while we have a lot of like strong ideas, but not complete agreement about what we want to move on with. Because we really like uplifted a lot of different things as levers. In my like mind of trying to do it all, which is definitely not what I necessarily am advocating for, but I'm questioning around this big one of what is it? Just expand food and farm education programs for all ages. That kind of feels like our core like thesis, and then some of the other ideas that we've mentioned I see as like maybe fitting under that. So I'm wondering if we want to try creating like an outline with that as our priority, and then think about some of the things that we've already talked about as being some actions that could help us move towards that priority. Does that seem to make sense to people? Okay. So what if we just had like sort of a blue sky moment with thinking about, like, in an ideal world, what are some of the actions that you all may be familiar with through your work that are fitting into this 1 to 3 year timeline? What are some actions that could be done? And they definitely could be things that have been said already today, or they could be different new things. I'm already saying Regeneration Corps should be like our model for every town. Are people feeling like this question is too big? Or is there a way to sort of try to think about it in more bite-sized pieces?
So at risk of speaking too much, I'll keep this brief, but I would love for organizations that are part of the network to be able to prioritize outreach and communications in a really concerted way, to be able to recognize our limitations with our budgets and our capacity, and to come together to be able to perpetuate a message that we're all behind and all using.
I'm wondering.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead, Emma.
I was just thinking, just sort of while we're doing education for all ages, also making sure there's like a viable future in careers in agriculture and that sort of. So, yeah.
So not losing the career development piece in that. Okay. I'm like really aware of how what a dichotomy I feel between like the typical high school trajectory and the CTE trajectory. And I'm something that, was it Beth who said, like, CTE is how it should be what if it was how we did education here in Vermont instead of a place a student goes if it's not working out in the other place. And I'm like really wanting to just flip that and sort of think about it from a more asset-based perspective of like, what is CTE? What are they doing really, really well? And then what can we integrate from those programs in that effort to break down the stigma and in the effort to give our other teachers more professional learning around real hands-on experiential learning.
Yeah, I've not spent a lot of time thinking about CTE. My kids aren't that big yet, and but I find myself keep coming back to this idea of community building through farm to school education, and how CTE is also building community in a different way, and thinking about like our rural community here, where we have like 2 mechanics who are trying to sell their businesses and they don't have a someone identified or interested who's going to take that on. And even though there are 3 car repair shops in this town, and they're always booked, there's not like that clear next generation that's going to take that on. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is a lot of these paths that are really separated from the traditional high school path are so vital to who ends up staying in our communities. And there's probably some threads to connect there, and I haven't done it yet, but that's just what I'm turning over in my mind.
I'm curious about the question around time. With what we know, knowing that we all have a lot to learn as well, is there something, if we think about the range of 1 to 3 years, is there something that we've talked about or a recommendation that Dana shared that strikes us as like, oh, this has to happen first? Like this, if we had all the funding in the world, like what would be number 1 from a time standpoint?
It's so hard to choose one. I feel like if you invested properly in any of them, they would just have a ripple effect. But my mind does go to some variation or combination of number 6 and 8 with the expanding food and farm education program for all ages, like we've been discussing already. Just because, given everyone's own realms, if they had some education on farm and food in general, they would take that into their own lives and their own careers and own families and bring it back to their loved ones. And that would have the greatest ripple effect in my mind. But I know that I don't know a lot about a lot of the other recommendations, and this is just coming from my standing in the food system world and what I've been learning recently. And I feel like anyone could make an argument for all of these recommendations having a powerful effect.
When I talked about number 8, or sorry, number whatever it was, expand food and farm education programs, and kind of named that as a top priority, I actually in my mind was blending the fully funded nature of it too. I don't know if anyone else did that, but I'll just change that in the notes, like expand food and farm education program for all ages, expanded, fully fund. Just combine those because I feel that's really huge. And I know I like the word that you used with the ripple effect.
And I think a support to that, I'm not sure if it was said, sorry, I apologize if it was, but I think a support to that is the cross collaboration between agencies. Because like it was said earlier, there's a disconnect between several of the agencies with the programs. So I think that is for a lack of a better term, that's a simple step that can be done, at least in getting a meeting at the very least, between certain people within several agencies.
That's a great point, and also really realistic. Like if there was a program that was going to be fully funded, I think that funding would come naturally from several different agencies, probably.
The discussion about fully funding programs makes me think too that there's a policy component missing perhaps from this analysis. And while that may not be a farm to plate initiative in the food system in and of itself, right, we have to recognize that we have a cheap food policy that is unwittingly continued by the state as well. So if we, whatever that tweak may look like to prioritize local agriculture, whether that's on our shelves or in our classrooms, there might be something there.
I like that, Shane. I feel like everyone has to buy food in some capacity. And I think that those tiny decisions that people make at the store with like, this is 50 cents more. Do I want to spend it here? Do I want to spend it somewhere else? That would have a really great effect on how people make those decisions on a daily basis.
I appreciate that, Rima, and how that brings it into the, like all of the retail, like our retail world as well, as we think about just the Venn diagrams that Dana mentioned. There's so much overlap, and farm to school is so much about that ripple out into the communities, and whether kids who have just learned about something in Harvest of the Month or something are then able to find it at their grocery store with their families or a farm stand or wherever they're shopping. Part of the last question is around resources. What if we had, oh no. What is it? What connections or resources are important? So again, I think we've touched on some of this, but are there connections between groups or sectors that should be prioritized, that should be strengthened if we're going to be moving the needle in these ways?
I guess one thing I would say from my experience is more sort of uniformity across the school system. Just like working with multiple schools, there's a lot of variations in like what programs are offered and what graduation requirements are.
Yeah, I think that even speaks to within the school, like an individual school, making sure that folks are like in agreement or wanting to do the same things. I know that FEED has a resource called Classrooms, Cafeterias, Connecting, and Communities. So it's just like, or connecting all those 3 C's together and making like one plan that includes the administration, it includes teachers, it includes community farms, retail, and etc. So like getting folks on the same page on a larger scale, and then also making sure that like individual schools are like wanting to work on the same projects and are committed at the same level.
Yeah, and I hear like an equity issue. Oh,
Go ahead. I was just going to say it's 11:30, so I'm going to start closing out the rooms. So we have 30 seconds once I.
So yeah, just like different people getting different things, it turns into an equity issue too across schools. Any final thoughts? Does anybody want to try to summarize this if we're asked to share back? Keegan just disappeared. All right, I'll give it a go. Bye.
Hey, Dana.
Hi, everybody. And I want to give thanks to Liz, was a note taker in our group, and we didn't get a chance at the end to say thank you. So Liz, I appreciate you organizing us and getting all those thoughts down. And for any other group that had a note taker, your role is so important and appreciated in capturing these incredible conversations that, and I don't know about your group, but our group was very organic in how we sort of unfolded and you know, but yet to have someone that can synthesize it and help us organize is, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Yeah. And I think, you know, I went back to it's nice to have a structure to a meeting and then be able to ignore it when, when it doesn't work for the conversation. So nobody wrote 3 top priorities, which I appreciate. But I think at least our group, and I'm sure the others did as well, had really important conversation. So let's take a few minutes with each group to highlight that conversation.
Betsy, I actually, and I don't know about the other groups, but our group did come up with it. We just didn't get a chance. We took advantage of all our time to talk and not put it on the Jamboard. So maybe as we do the share out, there'll be a chance to drop those in the Jamboard.
Yeah, that's great.
I think we forgot. I forgot about the Jamboard.
All right, so does your group want to go first? Who's ever ready to share from the group that had Dana with them?
Liz, you did such a good job with the notes. I want to honor you. Would you mind sharing out our priorities? You're still on mute, Liz.
Thank you. Possible levers, priorities, actions, whatever you want to call them. You're thinking a definition of ag literacy, working definition, something short, something consistent, just something to work with. Can't cover everything. Another place is working at multiple levels through a variety of partners to reach their own audiences with appropriate tools, menu of vocab that's appropriate to whatever the culture is in health or with your farm clients, whoever it might be. So an assessment of ag literacy and creating messaging that can be used out by whoever's already has those connections, not necessarily owned by Farm to Plate or anyone else. Create resources or provide training for community-based education. So teacher specific, how to use your community, like your school could walk to a dairy farm instead of getting on an unsafe bus full of COVID molecules, things like that. General community things, reflect back the Vermont do-it-yourself ethic, food system resiliency, the working landscape, what is your landscape, things like that, general messaging. and include farmers in that training and education about liability, educational approaches, agritourism. So break up the audiences of who's getting training and education. And coming back to agency of education capacity and involvement, really understand where is the bottleneck, where are the bottlenecks, you know, political, financial, capacity, leadership values, what's going on that role in communicating challenges around funding, pushing for change, convening disparate partners, integrating ag literacy into teacher training. Why isn't that happening more? It has in the past, it could again. And so those are what we came up with. Anything to add from my group?
Sort of capitalizing on the COVID moment and the renewed sense of interest around understanding more about ag literacy.
It was really awesome. Thank you. Any questions for that group, for Liz and the group? All right. Peter, you volunteered for our group.
Yeah, we had a good conversation, I felt. I think the main things that we talked about are kind of expanding and promoting volunteerism with ag literacy, especially drawing on the knowledge and experience of older Vermonters and really engaging them with the work and for health and connection to community, and also kind of some intergenerational work, and just wanting, I think one thing I said is I would love to discuss more like different ways to engage volunteers of all different ages and abilities in this work. And then we talked a bit about apprenticeship programs. I'm trying to think what would we say about that. Yeah, just kind of as an alternative to CTE, perhaps. We didn't go into a lot about that. And then the other big piece was bringing in marginalized voices and connecting with activist groups for more like food justice work, and making sure that people of color and Indigenous people feel connected to the local food system and what we're doing, because that may not be the case in some situations. I don't know if other people in our group had more to add that I missed.
Well, there was I would just say we were reminded that the briefs we were grappling with didn't include some of the education that's happening through the charitable food system. So that was important with Farm to Plate, that not get left out. So I just wanted to bring that up. Anything else from that group, or anyone else in that group want to add or questions? Okay. And I think, Megan, you had a good reminder that sometimes we forget that we focus the outcome on, do you want to frame it a little bit? Your comment on outcome, because I think it's important as we develop this plan.
Well, sometimes we get caught on the metric and lose sight of what that metric is leading towards as a longer term outcome. So, and just making sure that when we look at our recommendations, that just reviewing them to make sure we don't have anything that might be working against that, and have an unintended consequence. But you can add to it, Betsy. It wasn't.
I think that was the discussion. Like sometimes we're focusing on % local and we forget that ultimately that local is about improving quality of life for all Vermonters.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Any other comments, questions? That group? Okay. And the group that was with Shane?
Can I ask a quick question, Betsy? So the group, the group that went first, I was with, I just dropped all our priorities after Liz shared. I put it in the Jamboard. So maybe after a group goes, if the person who was sharing or someone who has access to the language can drop it in the Jamboard, then it's up there.
Great, thank you.
I'm sharing on behalf of the group called Narnia that was with Shane. We saw the levers as being so interwoven. We kind of tried to pull them apart, and then at the end sort of like realized we were weaving them back together. I think we started by talking about being really drawn to number eight with fully funding a farm to school program. And we sort of coupled that with an overall expansion of food and farm education for all ages. And we said to make that happen, we would see additional collaboration across state agencies would have to be happening as well as a statewide funded marketing campaign as being part of that. And let's see. Maybe I'll just leave it at that. We didn't come up with a solid 3, but we saw many of them being very, very important and interwoven. And I'm wondering if anyone else in the group wanted to share. Oh, especially around the transferable skills comment. I don't know if you're still there, Beth, or when we were talking about CTEs, somebody commented that just would be amazing if all of our students had such access to experiential learning in any classroom. And so how do we sort of look to the models that CTE programs have and uplift those and learn from those, as well as, learn from those.
Anyone want to add to that group or have questions for that group? All right. And Vera, if you or others can just drop some notes in. I think frankly, Shane is getting all of this, and for the 3 of you who took notes and just email that to Shane, we'll be able to capture it and pass that on. So I think that's helpful. So my last question is, given these really fruitful and somewhat different conversations in the 3 groups, is there a role for farm to plate that rises? That's one of the questions. And Shane, if that's the key question of the morning that would be most useful to the next steps, weigh in or not. But I know that Dana and I were giving instructions to ask, what's a role that Farm to Plate Network can play in this? And I don't know with your discussions, if there are thoughts about some critical roles that we want to chew on this morning before we come back as a whole group.
Jonathan made a pretty good point, I thought, in our group, which I think we all need to internalize. And that is, among all of us that have been involved with Farm to Plate all these years, there's some formidable people, not just who we are, but who we know. And that's pretty important. If we as a group chose to advocate a particular point of view, and we did it as a group, and we utilized our own organizations to bring whatever pressure needs to be brought to bear, it would cause things to happen. That's how lobbying, if you want to call it that, that's how it works.
I was going to express that, John, in a much more crude way, that Farm to Plate has to think about biting the hand that's feeding it. You know, I mean, we are obviously set up by the legislature, but there's no reason we can't go back and say, hey, you know, could you please work on this? If you want us to succeed, you need to do this.
Other thoughts? I also feel like that power of the network and all the people involved also could be used in the other direction. So in the conversation about, you know, is there more of a grassroots community level ability for people to engage in the food system? You know, we all in this network have so many networks that if in turn we're aligned in those connections and engaging also folks maybe who have not been traditionally engaged or able to participate in the level of some of the you know, active members of the network have been, you know, that power is amazing as well. So
I think something that Farm to Plate has done intermittently with varying success from what I know, which is not much, is connect with older agricultural entities in Vermont that are less involved in this conversation.
Sorry, Liz, can you just clarify what you mean by older entities? Like, I'm not sure what groups.
Talk about like FFA, for instance, is like the main one I'm thinking of, or generally dairy farming has been in the conversation, out of the conversation, and it's like maybe politically, culturally touchy. I'm not sure of all the dynamics around that, but I know there's intense like history and feelings, and like there's a whole heritage ecosystem around that. That's really interesting and important and part of Vermont agriculture and food systems. And it's ongoing, but it doesn't show up as much in farm to plate conversations. Like folks from FFA or from the dairy industry show up less often in farm to plate conversations. And I'm thinking about access and welcoming environments for all, and would include those folks as well.
They should also put the county farm bureaus in there too.
I would also propose to add inviting some Indigenous leaders in our community from the Abenaki. You know, they have a lot of Indigenous wisdom to share and aren't often involved in these conversations.
And I brought up the migrant farm workers in our breakout group. Groups like Migrant Justice, Bridges for Health are ones I know about. Milk with Dignity campaign, yeah.
Our group also touched on leadership from BIPOC community and fit that into the place of what we saw as what's missing.
all right. Any other last thoughts and comments? I'm going to put I just put the link to the full group session. It's just from 12 to 12:20. I assume, Shane, you have the notes to share out if we're supposed to share out key takeaways.
Yeah, I can if needed.
And we can give ourselves a little break before that starts at noon. But before we sign off here, any parting thoughts, comments, questions?
I'll just have one observation. I saw this in the large group and in the breakout group, you know, an amazing array of voices and experiences. And as John and Jonathan were talking, you know, a lot of leverage of opportunities and power, you know, powerful people that were sort of at the table here. And I'm looking at all your faces. And yet at the same time, you know, how do we cast sort of how wide is the umbrella of ag literacy, and how do we as a group continually try to make sure we are getting something done? So the intersection of the Venn diagrams, that's sort of the things that resonate for me a lot, is kind of the definition of ag literacy, and then how to leverage all this awesomeness to move us forward. So I'm inspired. Thank you all.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in the big room very soon.
Dana and Betsy, do you all want me to send you the notes? I don't know, like, are you capturing these? Or is it just for us?
I would love, so my small group kept really good notes. And so we have a Google Doc. I don't know if all the small groups did. I hope they did. And if that's lives somewhere yet, like Shane, do you have access?
I have it in the notes. What I'll do is I will just attach my documents so you all can see them if you're interested. The links to all those Google Docs are in the notes as well. I wanted to make sure you didn't need them in any specific way.
Yeah, I don't need them. I think the 3 note takers were
North Branch Nature Center.
What's that?
Nothing. I think it was
someone
Megan. Audio.
I think the 3 note takers were Sheila, Humphrey, Vera, and Liz. And
Yeah,
so,
I have them all.
oh, you have them all. Oh, so perfect. Yeah, I don't feel like I need them as long as they're saved somewhere.
Okay. That sounds good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. You all did awesome. That was really, really good facilitation, and I think a great session. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I always learn something new.
Definitely.
Thank you
All
both
right,
so much.
see you all.